Right there. That's how you tell. Okay, so we're going to finish up this set of notes, and then we will start histology. And I think we left off right with body cavities, right? Isn't that where we left off last time? Okay, so we left off with body cavities last time. I think somebody asked a question that, like, let it be known that, like, how do you know that this one's a pleural cavity and that one's a pleural cavity and this one's a mediastinum, but there's pericardial cavity within it? Well, there are boundaries. I didn't tell you about them yet, so now I'm going to. Okay, so the boundaries between the body cavities are formed by these membranes called serous membranes, and serous means watery. Okay, the function of a serous membrane is to coat the cavity wall and coat the organ wall and secrete fluid, so that when my lungs inflate and deflate, they slide against the body wall. If it were not coated with a lubricant, you would have friction, correct? And friction increases the likelihood of damage. So we got wiggly organs, and they're nice and lubed up between them via serous membranes. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's talk about the serous membranes and how they end up forming the boundaries of these body cavities. Okay, so the serous membranes, basically what it is a big continuous sheet that will go around the cavity and also around the organ. So let me just give you a hypothetical one, and then we'll talk about a specific one. So let's imagine, I don't care what body cavity this is a body cavity. I know it's not shaped like that. You guys will quickly learn that I cannot draw, but it's okay because I can communicate. Okay, and this is random organ. We don't care which one. How does a serous membrane work? What a serous membrane is I want you to imagine like a pink saran wrap, like you use during the holidays, right? And you're going to take the pink saran wrap, and instead of just wrapping the banana bread, you are going to wrap the Pyrex dish first, right? Empty Pyrex dish, right? And then you're going to take that same sheet of saran wrap, keep it continuous, and wrap the banana bread, and then stick it in there. And then there will be 2 layers of saran wrap between the banana bread and the body wall, or the Pyrex dish. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we are going to do is the serous membrane is going to do like this. It is going to be attached to the body wall, okay, all the way around. And then we're going to use the same continuous piece. We're going to drop it down. We're going to attach it to the surface of the organ. Same piece goes back up and forms a continuous sheet. And what should be between these 2 layers, guys? Just fluid, right? Serous fluid, lubricating fluid. So if this is a wiggly organ, and most of your ventral body cavities are at least kind of wiggly, right? You will have fluid between them that lubricates between the organ and the body wall. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a serous membrane. We'll get to the specifics of them in just a second. The serous membranes will always have 2 names. The first name refers to where the serous membrane is, okay? Notice that the serous membrane could be stuck to the organ or stuck to the body wall, right? Okay, and by the way, it is stuck even though I drew it far away. It's just hard to see when you draw it on top of it, right? Okay, so this part of the serous membrane that's stuck to the organ is called the visceral part. Visceral as in guts, like eviscerate, right? Okay, you have seen this before, even though you don't know that you have yet. If you have ever cut anything open, whether it's a chicken, whether it's a deer, whether it's a human, any living organism, if you have cut it open or looked inside it, you will see shiny organs. Why are they shiny? Because they've got a shiny serous membrane producing a lubricating fluid on them. That's why they're so squishy and slimy when you look at them, because they've got a serous membrane, and specifically the visceral part is what you're seeing. Does that make sense? Okay, and then the part that you don't see quite as often, unless you go specifically looking for it, is this part right here. This part right here is attached to the body wall, okay? And this part is called the parietal, P-A-R, parietal part. Say parietal, please. Parietal. I will do that to you every once in a while because you're more likely to spell something correctly if you have said it correctly, okay? So the parietal part is stuck to the body wall. So if I cut something open and I want to touch the parietal part, how do I get to it? What should I do? So slice myself open, I know that if I touch my liver, I would be touching the visceral part. What would I do? Yes, I touch the anterior wall, for instance, that was just anterior to my liver. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So that's the parietal part. And please note that there is one little part right here that's neither visceral nor parietal, right? That part that's not stuck to the wall and not stuck to the organ. That little part right there, it's nowhere near as abundant, but it is important. This part right here is called mesentery. The mesentery is important because it actually sort of suspends the organ from the body wall, right? It's also where the blood vessels tend to go through, between the visceral and the parietal layer, and they go through the mesentery, and the nerves go through. So why does your stomach never, on a good day, end up below your small intestine? Because it's suspended from the body wall, the mesentery. Does that make sense? Okay. So they're all suspended from the body wall, and that's called mesentery. So the first word you need to describe when you're looking at a serous membrane is it visceral or parietal? Every once in a while you'll have mesentery, but that's not quite as abundant. And then the next thing is each sheet of saran wrap has a separate name. Okay, and then we can go back to this particular instance when we were looking. So you have a sheet of saran wrap that you use to wrap the right lung and cavity, then a different one to wrap the left lung and cavity, then a different one for the heart, and then a different one for the entire abdominal pelvic cavity. That makes sense? So now what we have to do is, we said visceral or parietal, we have to name the sheet, right? Okay, so let's start. Go ahead.
My mom took this class and she had a cadaver with one lung, and she said it was just like in the middle of this guy's chest, huge one lung. Yeah, she said it was completely awesome. But how would the serous membrane be thicker, or how would it work? Because you have the part right there, and
I have no idea what that anatomy would look like, and I've actually never seen that before. That's really super cool. I have seen situs inversus totalis, in which everything's flip-flopped. Usually when we have really abnormal cadavers like that, we take them away from the students immediately, because we don't want for your memory clinically to be, oh my God, there's a lung. I'm like, no, everybody else has two. We told you this before, right? But so I don't know the answer specifically, but what I would imagine is that they had one large pleural cavity, right? One large pleura to wrap the whole thing, and then the heart's still separate. The heart still has to be separate. It's so cool. I wish I'd seen that. It's amazing. I love weird crap like that.
There's a question for the abdominal cavity. Is there just one pleural?
It's not. I haven't told you the name of it.
Sorry, the parietal, and then like, does it like curve around every single?
Super curvy. So hold on to that question. I'll describe it for you, and if I don't answer it, ask it again. Okay? You ready? So now, in these figures, what the serous membrane is represented in this dark aqua color. Do you see it? Okay. So what we're going to do is let's talk about the different serous membranes that you can run into. The first one are the pleural cavities are sort of formed by and wrapped in. Each one of them has a sheet. So now, how do you form the right pleural cavity and the left pleural cavity? Now I can tell you that the pleural cavity is basically bounded or created by the membrane itself. So what I do is I take a big sheet of serous membrane called the pleura, and I wrap around the body wall, right? You guys with me? Fold back up and wrap around the right lung, yeah? And then everything over there is considered the right pleural cavity, right? The sheet, that saran wrap that's separate for the right one and the left one is called the pleura, okay? Okay, so pleural cavity, because pleural sounds like an adjective, give it a noun, yes? Pleura is a noun. It doesn't need it doesn't need anything else, right? So let's talk about the lung here for just a second. If we want to get more specific about the pleura, we can describe it as visceral or parietal. So if I open up my thoracic cavity and I touch the shiny surface of my right lung, shiny surface of my right lung, okay, I am touching the right, fill in two blanks, right blank blank, visceral, pleura, yes. If I open up my thoracic cavity and I touch the body wall anterior to the right lung, right, I'm touching the right blank blank, parietal pleura. Got it? Okay, so now, How do I have two separate pleural cavities? Because the left has a separate sheet and a separate cavity that maintains its pressure separately. The good thing about that is if something crappy happened, like you got in a car accident and you poked and collapsed your right lung, the left one can still work independently. It's in a separate cavity. Does that make sense? Okay. So the right and left parietal and visceral pleura. Now let's go to the heart. Go ahead.
So at my job, sometimes I take fluid from the lung.
Yeah.
Do they go through both of those? And do
They usually go right here, into this space right here. Because if you start to accumulate fluid, which sometimes you do with either lung irritation or pathogen infection or chronic bronchitis or influenza, then sometimes you will build up too much fluid between them, and that will reduce the capacity of the lung to fill maximally and empty maximally, right? So you can suck it out. Huh?
So they're actually not going into the lung?
No. Well, you can go into the lung. That's a different thing. That's pneumonia
Okay.
when it's inside the lung.
But they're just pulling the serous fluid.
They can pull serous fluid out. Go ahead, you, and then you.
Does a hormone secrete the serous fluid? Or
No, it's not a hormone. It's epithelial tissue that is lining
Okay.
there. It's secretory epithelial tissue. Okay, go ahead.
So when you get like pleurisy, is the membrane implant, or is that where the fluid is, or is it around the lung?
So hold on to that question because I promise I'm going to teach you pleurisy. I just want to teach you all the membranes and then we'll look at a couple of patho situations. It's a good question. Okay, so that's lungs. Now let's look at heart. The heart right here, okay. So I told you guys that there was a right pleural cavity, left pleural cavity, and then there was a space between that wasn't considered a cavity. It's called a mediastinum. Why is the mediastinum not considered a cavity? Because it doesn't have its own membrane. It's just like between two membranes. Does that make sense? Okay. So if the membrane sort of creates the boundaries of the cavity, then the mediastinum is really just between two cavities, right? But there is something in the cavity, in the mediastinum, that has its own cavity, and it's the heart. So I want you to imagine the heart. Of course, the aorta is sticking off of the heart, it goes left. The aorta is sticking off the heart, so it goes left. Okay, so in most of us. So here's the heart. How do I form the visceral and parietal serous membranes, and how do I create my own cavity? Imagine the heart, instead of wrapping it with saran wrap, imagine that the saran wrap is a softly blown up balloon. And you push your hand into a softly blown up balloon, like this top picture right here. Right here. And then what you will end up with is balloon touching the surface of the heart space, and then another layer of balloon. Yeah? Hanging like that. Okay, does that make sense? Now it's got a cavity around it. Yeah? It sort of made its own cavity. Okay, so the sheet that wraps the heart is called the pericardium. Okay, so now do open heart surgery. Cut through the sac, touch the shiny surface of the heart. You are touching blank blank. Visceral pericardium. Open up the sac, touch the inner surface. You are touching parietal pericardium. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's got its own little sac right there. That makes sense? Okay, and we'll get to a disorder of this one when we talk about pleurisy in just a second, because they can all go bad on you. Everything can go bad on you, pretty much. And then the last one, the question she was asking about is, so right lung has its own, left lung has its own, and then the entire abdominal pelvic cavity has one sheet of saran wrap, but it's super duper curvy. Here it is. Do you see how curvy it is? This entire sheet right here is called, the whole sheet is called the peritoneum. Say that, please. Peritoneum. Peritoneum. So the entire thing down here is wrapped with one sheet of saran wrap called the peritoneum. And the peritoneum can either be visceral or parietal, so let's figure out when it would be visceral. Slice myself open, touch the anterior surface of my shiny liver. I am touching blank blank. Visceral peritoneum, correct? Cut myself open, flap it back, touch the wall just anterior to my liver. I am touching parietal peritoneum. Does that make sense? Okay, the whole thing has one big sheet. Look how freaking curvy it is. And look how much mesentery you have in the abdominopelvic cavity. Do you see this? Anything that's like hanging but doesn't actually have an organ between the two layers is actually considered mesentery. So there's a boatload of mesentery in there, isn't there? Does that make sense? So that's considered mesentery, and that's considered mesentery, and this is all mesentery. There's a bunch of blood vessels running through there, and nerves, and sometimes there's fat between the layers of mesentery. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so what am I touching right here? Visceral Peritoneum, exactly. What am I touching on this back wall? Parietal peritoneum. You guys with me? Okay, one last concept. Notice that compared to the little bit of space you had between the visceral and the parietal pleura and the visceral and the parietal pericardium, just a little bit of space in those, right? You got a pretty large amount of space in between the visceral and the parietal peritoneum, right? Okay. And if you're having a good day, what's the only thing that should be in there? Serous fluid. If there's an organ in there, you've had better days. If there's blood in there, you are bleeding internally. That's what that is. Okay. So, so let's talk about this. This is big enough that it gets its own name. This cavity that on a good day shouldn't have anything but serous fluid in it is big enough that we call it a separate cavity. It's a different concept than the other cavities, but it's okay. We can adjust. We call that the peritoneal cavity. And the peritoneal cavity should have only what in it? Serous fluid, and it's between the visceral and the parietal peritoneum. Okay, so let's talk about internal bleeding. Let's say I just had a car accident and I damaged my spleen and my blood pressure is dropping, but ain't nothing coming out nowhere, right? The spleen loves to bleed. It's really hard to stop once it starts bleeding. And so what you're seeing is your blood pressure is dropping. You're like, what the hell is going on? And then your abdomen starts to become distended and tight, right? So what's happening is the blood is actually going into the peritoneal cavity. Is that going to make you less dead? No, it's going to kill you just the same, but it won't be as messy. That's it, right? Okay? That's internal bleeding. Now, it doesn't have to go into that cavity. You could bleed into a pleural cavity too, but it's usually bleeding into a body cavity instead of out of the body. Go ahead.
How selective is the membrane that surrounds?
What do you mean selective?
Like when a cell has a selectively permeable membrane?
This is not meant for transport.
Okay.
So it is really meant as a boundary. Is it an impermeable boundary? Well, there's nothing that's perfect, but it's pretty damn good because we're all still alive, right? Okay. So let's talk about this just a little bit more. I'm going to give you some relationships, and I want you to figure out which one's true, because now we have two different cavities. We've got the abdominal pelvic cavity, and we've also got the peritoneal cavity. What's the relationship between these two? So I'm going to give you two choices, A and B, and I want you to tell me which one's true, okay? So A is the abdominal pelvic cavity is contained within the peritoneal cavity. I'm going to say it again. A is the abdominal pelvic cavity is contained within the peritoneal cavity. And B is the peritoneal cavity is contained within the abdominal pelvic cavity. The peritoneal cavity is contained within the abdominal pelvic cavity. Which one's true? B. Do you see the relationship between those two? Okay. So they are related, but they are not interchangeable, right? And you need to figure out what's the relationship between the two. Okay, and the last little concept that we need to talk about before we get into peritonitis and pleurisy and all that business is some organs were in the dish before you put the saran wrap in. And so they are behind the peritoneum. So, same banana bread situation, only I really, really like this neighbor. There are literally none of my neighbors that I like this much. And I put chocolate chip cookies in, right, into the dish before I put any saran wrap. It's like secret cookies, right? Secret cookies. So you're putting them in there, and then you put the serous membrane, the saran wrap on, right? And then you take that same sheet and you wrap the banana bread, and then the banana bread is on there. Do you see that the cookies will only have one layer of serous membrane? It's on the front side, but the banana bread will have two. Okay, so the cookies are what we call retroperitoneal. What does retro mean? Behind. Yes. So let's look at an organ that's retroperitoneal. Do you see this guy right here? The pancreas. Do you see how that one's not wrapped by visceral peritoneum? It's just in the dish before you put anything in there, right? Organs that are retroperitoneal tend to be less wiggly because it's almost like you packing taped them in there. Although you won't see it in this figure because it's not parasagittal. The kidneys are a phenomenal example of a retroperitoneal organ. The kidneys are smashed back against the body wall, and they really don't wiggle very much. And they're actually harder to find than you would imagine. If you opened up the abdominal pelvic cavity, you start looking around, first of all, guts everywhere. And then second, where the hell are the kidneys? Well, you can't see them because they're secret cookie kidneys. They're way back at the back, and you have to slice through the peritoneum in order to see them, right? Does that make sense? So does anybody know, generally, not all the time, when they do kidney surgery, how do they approach it? Yeah, they approach it from the posterior side. Does that make sense to you guys? So that's retroperitoneal. Find some organs that are retroperitoneal. There are more than one. I told you two, right? Kidneys and pancreas, but there's more than that.
I just have a question. So aren't the kidneys suspended with fat?
Yes, but basically remember that concept that I just told you of packing tape? That's what I always think of as retroperitoneal. So now it's packing tape with packing material around it.
Okay.
And that's that, right? And so collectively they help it stay in there. Interestingly, with that question that she just asked, so if I've got them hung up there and they're really not suspended by mesentery like the other organs, you guys with me? They're just like smashed back there, and then you packing tape them, and then you put fat around them. What happens when somebody massively loses a ton of weight really, really quickly is that you just lost all your packing material and they will slide down. And then it kinks your ureter and it can cause kidney failures. Happens with anorexia nervosa, happens with your kidneys fall. Kidney failure. Because it kinks the ureter and the kidneys just continue to try to get rid of waste products and it backs up. Go ahead. I can't hear you very well. Sorry. The packing tape is that layer of parietal peritoneum that I put in the back, right? That's the tape, the saran wrap, right? I just changed my metaphor, okay? And then, so it holds them back there, right? And they're less wiggly than something else. And then when she asked about the fat around the kidney, the fat, you can imagine like packing peanuts around it, right? Stick it onto the back, does that make sense? Okay, so that's retroperitoneal. All right, so the last thing in this set of notes is super duper easy. Oh wait, let's talk about disorders. Okay, disorders. What happens if these membranes get irritated? And of course, everything that can go wrong has gone wrong in a human body. Hopefully not in the same one. But you might have one of those that's just like, this one's a lemon. But so what can go wrong here? If your serous membranes get irritated, usually one of two things or both of them happen in series. Either they overproduce fluid or they underproduce fluid, right? So they're going to get pissed off. So let's start with her question, which was pleurisy. So pleurisy is a disorder that you probably will run into if you end up in clinical situations. Pleurisy is a situation in which you have irritated your lungs somehow. It could be a pathogen, could be after chronic bronchitis or after pneumonia. It could be after smoking is a really good way to get yourself pleurisy. Working in a coal mine is a really good way to get yourself pleurisy. So what happens is the visceral and the parietal pleura get irritated. And usually how they respond is they can't keep up with fluid production, okay? And so what happens is when I'm listening to your lungs, and your doctor can listen to the lungs from the back and from the front, they're like, breathe in really big and breathe out. If you were healthy, they shouldn't hear anything except squish when you're going through there, right? And your breath sounds. But if you have pleurisy and I listen, what I'm going to hear is as those dry membranes rub against one another. Let that happen for long enough and they will actually form scar tissue adhesions between the visceral and the parietal pleura. You guys with me? And once they do that, that decreases your filling and emptying capacity. Go ahead. Asthma is occurring in the bronchi and the bronchioles, and you can hear it because it's actually impeding airflow, but it doesn't sound the same as pleurisy. I'm super bad with the stethoscope, I'll go ahead and tell you. It's probably because I deal with dead people mostly, but even I can hear pleurisy. Like I can hear, I'm like, oh my gosh, crunch, crunch. Go ahead.
When you have an LVAD, does the serous membrane go around it?
Left ventricular assistive device?
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell they do with the serous membrane. You find out and teach me.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know. Okay, so that's pleurisy. Okay, don't smoke. Did you guys know that smoking was bad for you?
Never.
You didn't? Okay, so.
Never heard of that.
Well, I'm going to give you a bunch of reasons it's bad for you. There are a lot of like pastimes that I can understand the appeal of. Smoking has almost no upside, right? Almost not a single upside. I'm going to set something on fire and stick it in my face hole. I thought of that the first time anyway. Okay.
Where are lymph nodes? Or do they have serous membranes around
Yeah,
them?
they do. They're usually wrapped with whatever serous membrane is there. And so we'll get to lymph nodes later. Okay. So that's pleurisy. Next one, pericarditis. Pericarditis will kill you much faster. So pericarditis is when the pericardium gets irritated. So you only have one heart, so you don't have a spare, right? So what happens with pericarditis, let's say you had open heart surgery. If you slice into anything, you're going to piss it off, right? One of the complications of open heart surgery is that you can have pericarditis, which generally means that you're going to start to overproduce the fluid, right? And that's problematic because the bag is not stretchy. So if I get more fluid, what happens to my heart's capacity for filling? It decreases because the bag doesn't stretch, right? So if your heart can't fill well, your heart can't pump well, right? So pericarditis can kill you. Luckily, of course, if you've had open heart surgery, they are watching for this, right? They are monitoring the pressure and the volume of the fluid in your pericardial cavity. And what they do is if it starts to increase, they just drain it again. And generally, there's still a tube hooked up for a while anyway to drain it. Does that make sense? So how do you get pericarditis other than open heart surgery? Not super easy to get. One of the dependable ways, not super dependable, but increases likelihood of getting it is, interestingly, poor oral health. So you may or may not know this, but this is how I appeal to my children to floss. Because the normal flora bacteria that are in your mouth are totally cool. Everybody has them. But if they start getting motivated into your bloodstream, which of course they do when you don't take care of your gums, correct? Okay, get motivated to go into your bloodstream. For some reason, those little buggers love to attack the heart. They can cause valve damage, they can cause pericarditis, they can kill you dead. So one of the best indicators, other than the ones that you already know, of long-term cardiovascular health, you know diet, you know exercise, right? And you're like, wah, 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 wah. Genetics you can't do a damn thing about, right? And then there's oral health, right? So I have a heart problem. I had, yeah, you brush it, floss too. You gotta floss. Everybody hates flossing, right? I hate flossing, it's terrible. I have a heart problem. It's not related to this, but I had rheumatic fever when I was a kid, and it damaged my heart valves. And vaccinate your children. My mom was a hippie. Totally. So I have a heart problem. So because I have a heart problem, every single time I go to the dentist, I have to go on antibiotics, prophylactic antibiotics, even though I am an obsessive oral hygiene person. So if I have to have anything done and there's any possibility of motivating those things into my bloodstream, my heart's already damaged, right? So do you see why they make me take antibiotics? Because I can't handle another incidental damage to my heart. Does that make sense? Okay, and then the last one is peritonitis, and peritonitis is an interesting one. So here's peritonitis. If you irritate the peritoneum, it tends to cause just diffuse irritation because the thing is so damn big. So for instance, appendicitis can cause peritonitis, right? But it might not actually just hurt on your appendix. It might just make you kind of gassy or you have stomach ache because it irritates the peritoneum, right? One of the tragedies of peritonitis is that with ovarian cancer, and you don't see an ovary here, first of all, it's not the right section, and second, he's got a penis. So, not that doesn't occur, it actually does. Penises and ovaries can occur together, and I will teach you how that occurs when we get to reproductive systems. But, and the penis is basically just a big clitoris anyway. It ain't that fancy, and everybody's got one. The ovaries, of course, are in your abdominal pelvic cavity, right? And they're wrapped with peritoneum. And ovarian cancer occurs just deep to the serous membrane, the peritoneum, okay? And what ovarian cancer tends to do is it tends to irritate the peritoneum. But it doesn't necessarily feel like your ovaries hurt. It feels like I've got gas, or my stomach hurts, or I've had a stomach ache on and off for like a month. So the problem that occurs here with ovarian cancer is that even though ovarian cancer isn't very fast growing compared to a lot of cancers, doesn't metastasize very quickly compared to a lot of cancers, It is still one of the leading killers of women because it's very hard to diagnose in the early stage. So you go to the doctor and you had a stomachache for a month. Are they really going to give you an MRI for a tummy ache?
No.
Should they? No, they shouldn't, right? So it's really hard to diagnose in the early stages. What if you are educated about your health because you've taken anatomy and physiology, and you know that ovarian and breast cancer have a very strong genetic correlation? Then when you go to the doctor, you say, Doc, I've had a stomachache for a month, and my mother and her grandmother and one of my aunts have ovarian cancer or have had ovarian cancer. Then do you get an MRI slightly more likely? Yeah. So that's just sort of arming yourself with information and giving the doctor what you want her to have. Okay, so that's peritonitis. Okay, so last bit in this set of notes is abdominal regions and quadrants. Okay, so what I want you to imagine with abdominal regions and quadrants is that you go to the doctor. Oh, sorry, you are actually charting. You've got someone in, and they're coming in with complaints. Let's say it's abdominal complaints. What you're going to do is you're going to write on the chart what their abdominal complaints are, right? And sometimes there's a picture, but let's pretend that there's not, right? So you can say they got a pain or a lesion or whatever, X. And then you're going to hand it off. You're either going to hand it off to like the imaging tech or to the doctor or to somebody else. I don't know. But you need to describe where the complaint is, and there is a way to do that. You have abdominopelvic quadrants. There are just 4 of those, right? Draw a line from your sternum through your umbilicus down between your pelvic bones, and then draw another line perpendicular to it across your umbilicus, and it gives you quadrants, right? So you need to know examples of organs that are found in each of the quadrants, okay? So what's the best answer for liver? Yeah, right upper quadrant, yeah? Okay. If my appendix was giving me problems, I might complain of pain in the what quadrant? Right lower quadrant. Does that make sense? Do you guys know that the spleen is in the left upper? You might or might not know that. And the left lower is a little bit difficult, but it's got like the sigmoid colon in it. Okay. So what do? You find a safe answer that you can fill in on a fill in the blank, because I don't know which one you're going to study. And then you don't hedge your bets by putting a BS answer. Like you could, for instance, put small intestine for all 4 of them. But that does not demonstrate to me that you actually learned the concept, right? Okay. You find a safe answer and you put it down, okay? And, fair warning, if I said it out loud, you're responsible for it. Appendix, right? Liver, spleen. Yeah? Did you have a question, Jamie?
Yeah, like, so, what situation would you know which, like, whether you use quadrants to describe, or it's a region? Like, would you just want to
Regions are better. Doctors, clinical professionals have preferences. So regions are better because they're more specific. There's 9 of these, right? So you just kind of have to sort of be used to using both. So let's talk about the regions. The regions are named based on prefixes, roots, and suffixes that you run into. There are 9 of them. There's basically 3 columns. Let's do the middle column, okay? The top of the middle column is called the Epigastric Region. What's that mean? On stomach. If you let me name it, I would call it the Epihepatic Region, but they didn't let me name it, okay? It is on the stomach. The liver's on top of it. So epigastric. Umbilical, for obvious reasons, yeah? Okay. And then this one's called the hypogastric. That's a dumb name. It is below the stomach, but it's also below every other damn thing. But that's its name, hypogastric. Also called pubic or pelvic sometimes. Then let's do the side ones. These 2, right and left, hypochondriac, but from the original root meanings of hypochondriac. Below the cartilage. Below that big costal cartilage that connects your ribs and your sternum. Yeah? So how did your aunt get to be called a hypochondriac? Because, oh, I got a pain, I got the vapors constantly, right? That's exactly where it came from. Yes. Okay? So right and left lumbar are at about the lumbar region of your spinal cord and your vertebra. Right and left iliac, why are they called that? Iliac crest. They're also sometimes called the inguinal regions, which means groin. Okay. What do you do with these? You find a safe answer for an organ that's in each one of them. And if I didn't tell you which organ to memorize, you can hear that it's going to be a fill-in-the-blank question. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So last thing, and then we'll briefly start on histology, is Anatomical variability. Okay, so we talked about this, I think, before, but I want you to know that you are not prepared if you have looked at a single specimen, because we are all the same species, right? If we had a single sex come up and line up, you would all be the same species and the same sex, but there would be variability in your anatomy, right? Variability in proportions and sizes and all of those kinds of things. Pigmentation, there's all that variability. The same variability that actually exists outside exists inside. So how do you know what the brachial artery looks like? You find it in one cadaver, find it in all 6 if you can, right? Sometimes it has different branch points, sometimes it's slightly deeper, sometimes it's slightly more superficial. So you need to look in the lab at everything that is there. Do you only look at the models that they put on your table? No. You are responsible. You take ownership of your lab time. If they've got a different model on a different table, you go look at that one, right? If you have found a nerve in one cadaver, like the median and lateral pectoral nerve, and you want to know if it exists on the other cadaver, ask one of the TAs, ask the lab instructor. You can't see everything on every cadaver because we have to do different dissections to highlight things. And also those damn nerves break all the time, so like usually we've got them precious on one, right? But you definitely sort of take advocacy for yourself and walk around and ask questions in the lab. So next time I see you, you guys are going to have a quiz over this set of notes plus prefixes, roots, and prefixes, roots, and suffixes, okay? And it's going to be the beginning of class next time, but I'm not letting you go 4 minutes early, 4 precious minutes. So we will briefly start on histology now. So your histology, okay, so histology is not everybody's favorite, but it's pretty damn important because remember how I told you guys that it is only a badass histologist, who we call a pathologist, who would be able to tell if a lump of tissue taken from a breast is cancerous or not, right? In addition, here's something cool. Have you ever heard them say, hey, this person has brain cancer, but it actually originated in the lungs? How the hell do they know where it originated? Because a badass histologist, aka a pathologist, knows that I took the chunk out and it's lung tissue. Even though it's weird looking lung tissue, I can recognize lung tissue. So it metastasizes to the brain, but it divides and it's lung tissue, right? So diagnostically, the whole histology angle is super duper important. What is histology? Study of tissues, exactly. So briefly, before we get into histology in detail, we are going to start again with 2 histology truths and a lie. Let's see if you can tell me which of these is true and which is a lie. You ready? You got your idea about which one's a lie? I'll narrow it down for you because the last one is definitely true. That is the cross-section, transverse section of the human penis and Kanye. Is that a coincidence? I'm not sure. Okay, so, is that amazing? I love it. Okay, so which of these is a lie? Which one? The first one, yeah. Heart attacks are a big deal because cardiac muscle cells, with very few exceptions, are amitotic. If they get killed because you have lack of blood flow during a myocardial infarction or a heart attack, they don't regenerate. So you have lost those cardiac muscle cells forever, and therefore your heart is weaker for the rest of your life, and the likelihood of heart attack, a second one and a third one, increases with each heart attack that you have. This is non-regenerative tissue. So one of the things that we will be able to figure out as we go through this set of notes is what can you predict about a tissue's capacity for repair and regeneration? Is it protective, like the tissue lining of your stomach? And that's true too, by the way. If the tissue, the pH of the fluid in your stomach is about 2, it's very, very acidic. Yeah? And the lining of the stomach has modified it so that it can manage 2. But if you ever make a nick in the lining of the stomach, the acid will eat straight through the wall. It goes all the way through. It's called a perforating ulcer. It goes part of the way through. It's just an ulcer. Does that make sense? It's all sort of created by this. So that's where we'll start next time. On Friday, your quiz will be at the beginning. 10 questions or fewer.